Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're going on an incredible, literally 1400-year intellectual journey to trace the incredibly rich and complex evolution of Tafsir, the science of Quranic exegesis. We'll be traveling from its earliest days in the 7th century all the way up to the modern era. Let's jump right in.
Right off the bat, we've got a central paradox to tackle. Think about it. If the Quran was revealed in the Arabic language to people who perfectly understood its eloquent styles and vocabulary, why on earth did they need to develop an entirely separate, massive science just to explain it? It's a brilliant question, and understanding the answer is really the key to understanding the core problem those early Muslims faced.
To figure that out, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the science of tafsir, move on to origins and early interpreters, and then check out the hierarchy of methods. After that, we'll dive into classical Arabic masterpieces and wrap things up with the rise of Urdu exegesis.
All right, Section 1, the science of tafsir.
So what actually is this science? Why is it considered the most noble of all Islamic sciences? Well, it really comes down to understanding the divine will and intent. Remember that paradox we just talked about? Sure, the text was in Arabic, but it was revealed gradually, piece by piece, over many years. Sometimes a command was given for a very specific time period, and then a later command would come along and abrogate or basically cancel out the older one. Navigating those subtle nuances, figuring out the historical context, and sorting the general rules from the highly specific ones, that required a ridiculously precise, methodical system. They weren't just translating words here, they were painstakingly extracting an entire system of life that billions of people still follow today.
Which brings us to Section 2, Origins and Early Interpreters.
Let's see where this all started, right at the very beginning of Islam. It really all began with one person, the Prophet Muhammad. He was the very first commentator and guarantor of the text. And what's super fascinating here is that while he was alive, his companions generally didn't try to interpret the text themselves. Why would they? The Prophet carried that massive burden. He was the ultimate guarantor who explained the verses, detailed the general commands, and clarified the abrogated parts. It was only after he passed away that his companions really had to step up to the plate and share the immense knowledge they'd absorbed.
And let me tell you, they took this responsibility incredibly seriously. Take Hazrat Abdullah ibn Abbas, for example. He famously said, "If the rope of my camel were to be lost somewhere, I would find it in the Holy Quran." I mean, wow, that just perfectly captures the intense, almost unbelievable dedication of these early companions. Ibn Abbas was actually so skilled at this that the Prophet specifically gave him the title interpreter of the Quran. From there, 10 specific companions became absolute legends for their exegetical skills, basically laying the bedrock for everything that came next.
Moving right along to Section 3, the hierarchy of methods.
Okay, so as time went on and the Muslim empire expanded, scholars realized they needed a bulletproof system to completely eliminate guesswork when extracting meaning. So they developed a really strict 4-step hierarchy. Step 1, interpret the Quran using the Quran itself. Makes sense, right? A brief statement in one place is often totally detailed in another. But if that doesn't answer it, you go to Step 2. Look to the hadith, the traditions of the Prophet. Still not clear? Step 3, consult the sayings of the companions, because, well, they were literally there on the ground witnessing the context of the revelations. And finally, Step 4, look to the tabi'in, the successors who learned directly from those companions. It was an incredibly rigorous, disciplined chain of knowledge.
Next up, Section 4, classical Arabic masterpieces.
This intense methodology sparked an era of scholarly output that is, quite frankly, hard to wrap your head around. It was a true golden age. Just take a second to let this number sink in. 30,000. That is the original page count of Ibn Jarir al-Tabari's 9th century masterpiece commentary. 30,000 pages. Historical records actually tell us that his students practically begged him to condense it, basically saying, "Look, we are literally going to die of old age before we ever finish reading this." He graciously agreed and chopped it down to a mere 3,000 pages. Tabari's work was an absolute game-changer because he meticulously recorded those chains of narration from the companions and successors, setting the ultimate gold standard for all future commentaries.
And this brings us to a really fascinating methodological divide. As time went on, other scholars started looking at the sacred text through totally different lenses. Take Zamakhshari's Al-Kashaf, for instance. He belonged to the Mu'tazilite school, which heavily prioritized human reason, so his commentary is famous for hyper-focusing on Arabic rhetoric, linguistics, and logical question-and-answer formats, largely bypassing the traditional hadith. But then, in stark contrast, you have Ibn Kathir.
His 14th century work relied strictly on historical chains of transmission, authentic hadiths, and early traditions. It is literally the perfect showdown between rationalism and pure tradition.
Then, you've got scholars who brought a totally different toolkit to the table, like Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. His commentary, Mafati al-Ghaib, took on the style of sages and philosophers. He focused intensely on cosmology and the natural sciences. In fact, he famously claimed he could deduce up to 10,000 issues just from the opening surah of the Quran alone. He essentially used the telescope of philosophy and logic to refute opposing sects and vigorously defend his creed.
Now contrast all that with this number, 40. While Tabari was turning out thousands of pages, and Razi spent a lifetime on sprawling philosophical treatises, Imam al-Suyuti, a brilliant 15th century scholar, did something completely different. He remarkably completed his half of the Tafsir al-Jalalain in just 40 days. Seriously, 40 days. It's not some sprawling exegesis. It's an ultra-efficient, highly precise Arabic translation and commentary that carefully matches the exact word count of the Quran itself. That incredible conciseness turned it into a legendary textbook that scholars are still studying today.
And finally, Section 5, the rise of Urdu exegesis. We're now making a big jump from the classical Arab world to the modern era in the Indian subcontinent. As Islam took deep root in South Asia, Persian and eventually Urdu became the dominant languages. So here's a quick timeline guiding us through modern Urdu commentaries. And the key thing here is that these weren't just written for elite academics. They were designed to speak directly to everyday people dealing with modern socio-political challenges. Let's see how their approaches evolved over the years.
We kick things off in 1905 with Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi. Context is absolutely everything here. Thanwi noticed this huge surge of inaccurate, commercially driven translations spreading among common Muslims, which he felt directly contradicted Islamic law. His work, Bayan al-Quran, was an urgent, necessary response to that. He used very fluent, accessible, and refined literary Urdu to fight back against those careless translations, all while firmly anchoring his explanations in traditional Sharia concepts.
Fast forward to the 1930s, and we get Abul Kalam Azad's Tarjuman al-Quran. Azad was a true 20th century intellectual. He broke away from traditional imitation and started merging modern sciences like ethics, geography, and history straight into his Quranic analysis. Now, while it was universally praised as an absolute masterpiece of Urdu literature, the sources noted definitely sparked some serious debate. Critics weren't too happy about him incorporating contemporary theories of religious evolution and even aspects of Darwinism into his exegesis.
About a decade after that, Syed Abdullah al-Maududi started his Tafhim al-Quran. Maududi explicitly targeted the modern educated public, and he was incredibly innovative. He was actually the first to introduce things like historical maps, archaeology, and the cultural periods of man right into a Quranic commentary to help readers actually visualize the history. But, as our source text highlights, his methodology generated intense scholarly debate. Why? Because he explicitly bypassed traditional hadith chains of narration, preferring to rely heavily on his own rational opinion and inventiveness.
Moving into the 1970s, we see the monumental work of Justice Pir Karam Shah. He spent 19 years authoring Ziya-ul-Quran. What's really unique about his work is how he managed to synthesize two entirely different worlds. On one hand, he deeply integrated ancient Sufi spiritual discussions in the poetry of Rumi, but on the exact same page, he would address highly practical modern issues that the traditional commentaries rarely touched. We're talking about modern economics, political rights, and women's rights in contemporary society.
We're wrapping up this historical review with a perfect illustration of just how far the methodology has shifted. Think back to those traditional commentaries like Tabari and Ibn Kathir, who relied strictly on chains of hadith and the early companions. While modern scholars like Amin Ahsan Islahi, the author of Tadabbur-i-Quran, forged completely new paths. Islahi literally omitted hadith and the sayings of the companions from his commentary entirely. Instead, he relied on intense personal reflection and a deep structural analysis of pre-Islamic Arabic literature to understand the Quran's meaning. It is a massive, dramatic departure from that four-step hierarchy we looked at earlier. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder. We've seen Tafsir evolve from the Prophet's direct explanations to massive 30,000-page historical chains, to deep philosophical treatises, and all the way to modern Urdu works that incorporate archaeology and economics. As human knowledge, science, and society continue to evolve at lightning speed, what entirely new lenses will future generations use to interpret and understand these ancient sacred texts? The 1400-year journey is definitely far from over. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.